Court. This is the 1996 Menendez brothers trial. We are reading through the transcript because that's what we have. There's no video for whatever reason. We had video in the first trial, we streamed through that. Now we have to read the transcript, and unfortunately, you're stuck with me. So, we have made it through the state's case. We've completed it. It didn't change a whole lot, I would say, other than they really drive home a lot about the uh, making the abuse not a thing. Like they're trying to diminish it. Where in the first case, they weren't really prepared to defend it, and they still can't defend it, but they tried their best in this trial. I think the best they could with no eyewitnesses that would actually say Jose was a nice guy, even though they tried, but it didn't work. So that's kind of where we're at. We have just begun the defense's case. The state just rested. It is now November 20th, 1995. This is the week of Thanksgiving, so this is Monday, and we're going to finish off the week with Dr. Fackler. Just so you know, we're coming back where we left off, which was the second half of the day. We went into our lunch break on Monday, November 20th. And we're going to pick up right where we left off. Miss Abramson is doing the questioning for Eric's defense team, and so this is direct with Dr. Martin Fackler, who is the wound ballistics expert. So please hit that like button if you haven't done so already, and let's get started. Here we go. So the court says the defendants are in court with their lawyers. People are here. The witness is here. Get the jury out, please. The jury enters the courtroom. The court says, okay, the jury is back and will resume with direct examination. And Ms. Abramson says, thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Fackler, this morning you were describing how the research at the wound ballistics laboratory that you headed was developing wound ballistics for various kinds of projectiles, correct? Yes, correct. And did you develop wound projectiles for shotgun wounds involving double-aught buckshot and number 4 buck? Yes, we did. And also birdshot. And have you had experience evaluating wound ballistics issues involving shotgun injuries? Yes, I have had experience involving forensic cases with shotgun wounds, and I've used the shotgun wound in the shotgun wound in writing in order to illustrate the kind of damage that occurs in the military with explosive devices such as landmines and mortar shells and things of that sort, because this is what the military really sees most of. Remember, he has all military experience. He was in the Navy and the Army, which I didn't know that occurred where people switched branches, but he did. And he had like a 30 some year career in the Army and Navy combined. And he specialized in wound ballistics there. And now he's a consultant, in case we forgot from the last stream. He continues on and says, in Vietnam, we probably saw 80% of what we saw was training projectiles from various kinds of explosions rather than rifle bullets. In order to study that, the shotgun is a perfect example because it also throws many projectiles, and you can vary the distance they are apart by simply varying the distance from what you're shooting. And the same relationship holds true with explosive devices. The further a soldier is away, the less penetration in his body and the less close together the fragments are. So these explosive fragments, these are like things that grenades and mines and things like that. That is correct. And shotgun patterns are a good reference, similar kind of projectile patterns as these explosive devices that are used in war times. Well, yes. In teaching the surgeon about the causation of how tissue gets disrupted, if you described, say, if a person has a leg blown off by a grenade or stepping on a landmine, that identical kind of an injury could be produced by several simultaneous, simultaneous shotgun blasts. I'm on pain meds. I'm hurting today. I might go cameraless just in a little while. Who knows? So if I slur a lot more, I apologize. So he says simultaneous shotgun blast because it's the same kind of a projectile. When the shotgun pellets spread to only a few inch diameter, there are many projectiles hitting many paths in projectiles in various close proximity, which tend to separate the issue. Also, each of the pellets has a temporary cavity from a real close range, say down 2 feet or so. The shotgun pellets hit and act as one projectile, so basically the wound profile would give a large temporary cavity, much like a very heavy caliber. One of the old 4570s or something, traveling about the same speed of shotgun does and the same speed that a shotgun does, and weighing about 300 to 500 grams. And they give you a very large temporary cavity because they act as one projectile. And as they spread out, they have their individual temporary cavities. Each are similar, but interact with one another. I'm confused, but maybe you guys. He's a talker. He's a word salader too. And it's not that he's spewing just a bunch of fancy words to sound fancy. He's trying to explain things, but he kind of goes into more detail than he needs to and says things that kind of he goes off in tangents, I'll say. But he's a very nice man. He's very, very educated in what he's doing. He is the GOAT. He's like the original uh, wound ballistics wounds expert of all time. And the FBI now teaches what he taught or what he, showed in the field is the proper way to do things. So the real deal here. All right, the next question is now, because of the fact that you had dual residency and at one time had a plastic surgery residency, do you believe that you are more familiar with the nature of breast tissue than the average general surgeon? Objection, leading. Leading? Overruled. He says, yes, certainly, because as I think I mentioned earlier, the portion of the plastic surgery that I tended to be attracted to and did as a part of my general surgery rotation was, how shall I say, the necessary kind, where a person was deformed or incapacitated by some procedure, by some deformity. And there are many women who have excessively large breasts that are truly incapacitating and painful, and so probably have done 20 maybe so called reduction mammoplasties, where you actually remove, say, 3/4 of the mass of breast tissue and take what's left, tailor it together, and transplant the nipple. It's a satisfying operation because these women are very, very relieved. So he was originally going to go into plastic surgery, and with that was his like his original residency or whatever, his original path that he was going to take. But then with the Army and the Navy experience that he was having, he got interested in trauma surgery, especially, men on the field, people on the field who are injured and treating those injuries. So that's how he became a ballistics wounds expert. The next question is, and as a consequence of that experience, are you particularly familiar with the nature of breast tissue as compared to muscle tissue? Well, I never really compared it before this case. Then it came up. Certainly, the breast tissue is a very different tissue, and I'm very, very familiar, having operated on it many, many times. And is breast tissue harder to cut, for example, than muscle tissue? Oh, much harder. It's very fibrous tissue. It's composed of, there's a lot of scarring in breast tissue. And the reason is that in the monthly cycles of a woman's hormonal cycle, I did not know this. I'm learning something right now. He says that it is generally at a time of the month most women have pain in their breasts. And this has become known as fibrocystic disease. Actually, I don't think it should be called a disease because essentially all women have it to some degree or another. They will get it when they have pain, there's inflammation in the breasts, swelling, and that's why the pain. And then as that subsides, anytime you have inflammation in the body, in the pathology of the body, inflammation is followed by scarring. So you have a little bit of scar tissue laid down each month, a little bit more each month. So when you get a woman of 45, as I understand Mrs. Menendez's age, and just look at her breast tissue or breasts from the photographs, I can tell that's a dense breast. That's what a dense fibrous breast looks like. So he he's well versed in this topic. So, if an object were to be penetrating that kind of breast tissue, whether it was a knife, for example, and the cutting aspect, or a lead projectile, is that a different tissue to penetrate as compared to, say, muscle tissue? Well, that question is something that we don't have a direct answer. We must judge, we must make certain assumptions. We must make the assumption that if it is harder to cut, in other words, I can take muscle tissue and usually dissecting that muscle with what they call a Metzenbaum scissors, you can cut across muscle tissue. And if I want to sew it together, I use a regular round needle, sort of like sewing needles. With breast tissue, it's entirely different. You can't cut it with a Metzenbaum without a great deal of difficulty. What you have to do what you have to use is a very sharp scalpel. And to sew this tissue together, to get a needle through there, the round needle is very difficult to use. You have to use what's called a cutting needle with three cutting edges. And that's the standard way to repair breast tissue. Is to use a cutting needle. Wow. Okay. I learned a lot there that I did not know. My question was, would the same difficulty and fibrousness of the tissue be a factor if you're trying to evaluate that velocity, for example, pellets that would need to be traveling at to penetrate through the I'm sorry, I didn't get to the end of my answer. You're right. Sorry. He continues on, I'm assuming from this that therefore Mr. Khan says objection as to this point calls for speculation, overruled. The witness says, knowing what we know, not assuming, knowing what we know about the density, how hard the breast tissue is to cut and feel, one would, I think the assumption is correct that a penetrating projectile would have more difficulty in penetrating breast tissue than it would muscle tissue. I'm unaware, however, of anyone ever doing a penetration of shooting through breast tissue. I don't think it's ever been reported in the world's literature. Ms. Abramson says, you're familiar, are you not, that Dr. Roger McCarthy claims because it's soft that breast tissue is easier to penetrate and easier to cut than muscle tissue, are you not? Yes, I'm familiar with that. I'm just smiling because it's a ridiculous statement. And because he's not a freaking medical doctor and he's not a breast expert, a breast tissue expert. This guy actually is. And what is your opinion of that testimony on his part? Well, that is what the layman would think. And after all, he is a layman on the subject. Burn. Oh, Dr. Martin Fackler, you rock. That was an awesome burn to Dr. McCarthy. Now, in addition to your Army experience as a surgeon dealing with wound and ballistics, have you also had a lifetime of familiarity with firearms? Yes, I have. And does that predate your military career? Oh, yes. Is it more extensive than the exposure you had to firearms in the military in any form of training or even as a wound surgeon? Oh, certainly, certainly, as they don't train doctors very much in weapons in the military. Well, would you describe for the jury your familiarity and training with weapons over the course of your life? Yes. I started shooting when I was about 12 years old and was in a local gun club, and I was interested in shooting, and there were people there to teach me how to shoot and handle weapons safely, and I became a certified rifle instructor. During the summers when I was doing uh, let me start over if I could read. During the summers, when I was going to college and medical school, I had a summer job at a boys' camp as a rifle instructor. And then, when I was in college, I became a member. And finally, the captain of the college rifle team as far as competitive shooting with small bore rifles. And since that time and during that period, have done a lot of work on weapon technology. I was very interested in accuracy, what makes one rifle accurate and another one not, and I hand loaded my own bullets and did certain things like that. This came in very handy when I was at the laboratory. It was set up by the Medical Research and Development Command with no armorers. No armorers? Armorers is a specialty in the military of a person whose specialty is weapons. We did not have any assigned to the Letterman Army Institute of Research, somewhat of an oversight. I really didn't need one because I knew the technology well enough to do what we needed to do with the weapons, which included sometimes modifying bullets and actually making bullets myself on a lathe to different shapes to prove particular points about how one shape gave you a different wound profile than another shape. Holy crap, like he's making his own bullets to try to determine shapes, wound patterns. Wow. Okay. Now, turning to some of the issues in this case, you have been provided, have you not, with all of the illustrations and photographs of x rays that were included in Mr. McCarthy's presentation, correct? I believe I have all of them, yes. Were you also provided a complete set of all the scene photographs and all the autopsy photographs and all of the coroner photographs in this case? Yes, I have. Were you also provided with all of the reports, both original and amended, prepared by Dr. Golden? The autopsy reports, yes. Did you also have a meeting with Dr. Golden on October 5th, I believe it was? Yeah, 1995, near Van Nuys. I can't verify the date. It was early October. The 5th is probably correct. Yes. And did you sit down with him and go over photographs and some of his findings and discuss the mainly disputed areas of the autopsy report? Yes. And did you also receive, by way of photographic information, photographs made by Charles Morton, the defense criminalist, of all the clothing of the decedents in this case? Yes. And did you also receive transcripts of testimony? Yes, I did. Both from the first trial and from this one? I don't recall if I received any from the first trial. I don't believe I did receive any from the first trial. Did you receive any transcripts of Dr. Golden's previous testimony either before the grand jury or the first trial? Don't believe so. Okay, and have you also had an opportunity to confer with Dr. Cecil Wecht, a forensic pathologist who's going to testify for the defense? Yes, I have. And did you also have a discussion with Dr. Michael Baden, another forensic pathologist who's consulting for the defense? I believe this is the Dr. Michael Baden, who his name comes up in a lot of the cases that I'm covering. He came up in the Sandra Birchmore case for in Norfolk County that's related tangentially to the Karen Reed case because of all the same corrupt investigators. Dr. Michael Baden, he used to have a show like way back, I want to say the 90s, man, or early 2000s. He had a show on, I think it was HBO called Autopsy or something like that. And he would go through and explain all the different, ways he would determine causes of death and things like that. And it was so fascinating to watch. It really got me into like true crime. He did. And like the forensic aspect of true crime. And when I was like a teenager, young adult, I mean, it already was, but he really got me into it. And anywho, so yeah, Dr. Michael Baden, spelled with an A, but it's pronounced like Boden. And so, yeah, I'm assuming that's who they're talking about. He's married to Linda Kenny Bodden. She has her own YouTube show now called Justice Served, which she co hosts with another individual, Michael Bryant. They're excellent together. They covered the Karen Reed case. I watched a lot of it with them because they let the trial play, and then they would only comment when there were like sidebars and stuff. So it was great. You were in real time, and she gives great commentary. Anyways, I'm just a fan of both of them, so I'm kind of fangirling to throw that in there. Anyways, so yes, she asks, did you consult with Dr. Michael Baden, another forensic pathologist who's consulting for the defense? Yes, I did. Now, would you say, Dr. Fackler, that a surgeon dealing with projectile-induced wound has an enhanced interest in the actual impact of projectiles on tissue than does a pathologist who's dealing with someone who's already dead and isn't going to require any agreement? Objection calls for speculation. Overruled. The witness says, well, I would a trauma surgeon who has a specific interest in gunshot wounds. Yes, there are many surgeons that treat gunshot wounds matter of factly and really don't have any interest in the subject. I don't think they would have any further knowledge. But with respect to all surgeons who are treating traumatic wounds, aren't there things that are considerations for them that are not considerations for pathologists who are only examining the bodies of the dead? Certainly. I'm sorry, I misinterpreted your question. And with respect to surgeons such as yourself who are treating, and well, let's start with just surgeons who deal with traumatic surgery. What is this area of enhanced concern over that, say, of the forensic pathologist? Well, the forensic pathologist doesn't have to worry about the outcome. He doesn't have to worry a thing about treatment. And the surgeon's entire focus is upon treatment, to give the most effective treatment and not to overdo it. But not enough, and it's a balancing act many times. Around every projectile path, there is a certain amount of tissue that will be hit with the bullet, and this tissue will be destroyed. And what will be left of the tissue if you look at the bullet hole, most of them aren't actually holes you can see light through, but they're an aperture where in the middle you can see tissue sort of frayed and minced. This is sort of what's left of the tissue when the projectile made its hole. So that tissue certainly is not going to survive. Then, getting out from that, for instance, in the wound profile I drew there earlier, when that tissue gets when the tissue gets thrown aside in most parts of the body, depending on how forcefully it gets thrown aside and how large the temporary cavity, it could reach its elastic limits and break. Therefore, when it splits, there's certainly damage where it splits. There will be certain areas in which, as it's stretched, small blood vessels will be torn, and the tissue that is supplied by these small blood vessels will no longer have any blood supply, and that tissue might die. So, if this tissue is left in the patient, it could be that infection would be set up there. Infection could travel through the body and cause a serious, maybe even fatal outcome. So, what the goal of the surgeon in treating the wound is to initially to excise enough tissue to avoid bad consequences, but stopping there and not going overboard and taking out 3 times that much tissue and unnecessarily crippling the patient. It was a really long explanation. So is that why, in that area of the surgeon's concerns, the notion of these temporary, will you call it cavitation? What it means is temporary cavities, a temporary hole. A temporary cavity is what it's called. Cavitation is sort of a shortcut term. The fact that temporary cavities occur that push tissue aside and can therefore damage it, it's important for the surgeons to know that so that they can remove all the damaged tissue so that the rest so that the wound can properly heal, correct? Well, yes. They have to, well, it's a difficult question to answer. It's not necessarily must remove all of this tissue. Basically, there are some. This is one of the fallacies that sometimes you'll get the impression that an experienced surgeon can look at the tissue and say, "Oh, this tissue will survive, and this tissue will, this little bit right next to it won't, and I'll cut here and have the right balance." There's no surgeon in the world that can do that constantly all the time, including myself, and we need to realize this. And what the recommendation is, so there will be a certain amount of tissue that will be questionable. All he needed to say was, there will be a certain amount of tissue questionable. He really, really, okay, his answers are really long and starting to get to me. I like him. He's very knowledgeable, but get to the point, man. All right, so now let me just cut you short. I think you missed the point of my question, though. From the surgeon's standpoint, he's got to keep in mind this notion of the temporary cavity. Even that tissue that isn't absolutely destroyed directly could be destroyed, and he has to consider it in planning his surgical plan. There's what I'm asking. But I was just going to compare it to a pathologist where they're not going to cut away bad tissue, so it doesn't matter. He says, I was trying to lead you away from a point that is another common misconception. Okay, that is, if one takes one of my wound profiles, and for instance, the M16, that's a temporary cavity about the size of a cantaloupe, and there's a common misconception that that amount of tissue will be damaged. So, in other words, you take and therefore you have to remove a cantaloupe size amount of tissue, and that's just not true. Everything that's stretched by the temporary cavity does not get destroyed, and you don't have to remove it. But you do have to be aware of the concept of the temporary cavity to understand what's going on in the body. You do. And in certain tissue, the temporary cavity gives you more or less, equivocal evidence. Like in the liver, the temporary cavity just minces tissue badly, and muscle and lung tissue. It doesn't do as badly because these tissues stretch, and the tissue that is stretching and can absorb being stretched is not going to be damaged as much as one that can't. Blood vessels, for instance, can be stretched and not be torn by the temporary cavity, especially large blood vessels. Things that can't stretch, like bones, can be broken by the temporary cavity because they can't stretch. You can take a big bone and break it, and the blood vessels right beside the big bone will not be damaged at all. This has been proven time and time again experimentally. In 1962, there was the addition of a book called Wound Ballistics by the Government Printing Office that goes into this in great depth. I believe you sent a portion of that chapter to me, particularly the chapter dealing with thigh wounds and how the blood vessels in such a wound basically are stretched aside or pushed aside by the temporary cavity, and rarely, if ever, are there are they perforated or torn. Objection leading. The court says, it's not really a question. Ms. Abramson says, was that the section that you were referring to? The section you've cited is exactly the section I was referring to in talking to the jury. And in reading the testimony of Dr. Lawrence, did you observe that I read that section to him? Yes, I did. Now, turning to this particular case, if you'll take a look at what's up on the board, which I believe is 295, that's a chart which consists of 10 images, and the two central images are failure analysis conception of what they call the shot number one. You see that? The witness says, Your Honor, may I go down and look? The court says, sure, go ahead. This is an expert witness. He's testified a lot of times because he could have asked the attorney, can I go down and look? But she would just have to ask the judge. So he's just like, Your Honor, like he knows it's his courtroom. So that's pretty it just shows that he's quite experienced. The court says, go ahead. The witness says E and F, and Ms. Amerson says, yes, you've seen those before, have you not? I think I have seen them briefly. I've never really sat down and studied them. You understand what's portrayed there is a lining up of various wounds to both Mr. and Mrs. Menendez and positing the theory that all of these wounds were connected and caused by one single shot of number 4 buckshot. You understand that to be the premise here? That is, as stated also in words and in Dr. McCarthy's report. Yes. Okay, and have you carefully examined each and every wound appearing on both Mr. and Mrs. Menendez's bodies that Dr. McCarthy associates along this trajectory to see if, in fact, that trajectory is possible? Yes, I have. The court says again, could we identify Dr. McCarthy's designation as to what shot number he designated? Ms. Abramson says that's number 1, Your Honor. I think I have. This is what Dr. McCarthy calls number 1. She did. And Dr. Fackler, with respect to the numbering system, do you understand that this diagram encompasses a number of wounds that Dr. Golden has applied a numbering system to? Yes. And let's state what those are for the moment. Are you familiar with the fact that Dr. Golden refers to Mr. Menendez's left elbow wound as number 4? Yes. I'd have to check to make sure. I have it right here, and I can, but I think that's right from my recollection. Well, why don't you just take out the autopsy report so you have them handy? Okay, I have them. Now, I'm going to just restate the numbers and ask you if you confirm that those are Dr. Golden's numbering. Look across this. I have checked your question. I have number 4. I have checked that, and you're correct. And going across this conceptualized trajectory, the next area of wounds that this trajectory supposedly affects is an area on the right chest of Mr. Menendez. You're aware of Dr. Golden's numbering that number 6 of Mr. Menendez? Yes. And of the next area that's supposedly part of the trajectory is the upper right arm and the antecubital fossa area of the right arm of Mr. Menendez that Dr. Golden has referred to as both wound number 3, the upper arm, and number 2 to the individual defects. Yes, this is so confusing that they all have different numbering systems. Like, why? I mean, I get it that what's his face, McCarthy, is using his own because this is what he thinks, but you're not a medical professional and you're not actually a crime reconstructionist or anything like that. You're a mechanical engineer, so why didn't you use the Dr. Golden's, you know, medical expertise for yours? But that's not what happened. So now it's so confusing for the jury to have to be like, well, wound number 1 for this guy is wound number 3 for this guy, and trying to keep them all straight when you're listening to testimony is confusing. But anyways, let's move on. And are you also, did I read that one? Yeah, that Dr. Golden referred to. Okay. And are you also aware that this trajectory supposedly terminates or ends with wounds to Mrs. Menendez's left breast that Dr. Golden has numbered number 6 for her? Yes. Okay, why don't we start at the end if we can? With respect to the left breast wounds, you are aware that Dr. Roger McCarthy described this originally in his report as a wound, the direction of which was left to right. He described it as superficial and indicated that it appeared to be a low velocity impact originating with a basically shot column that emerged from Mr. Menendez's right arm. You're aware that that's how he described that wound to the breast. Yes, I am. Okay, now, first of all, is there any evidence whatsoever that this wound directionally was left to right? I don't believe there is. I think this wound, however, does contain elements that makes it very difficult to judge that. The elements are one, that you have a wound that is going through breast tissue and tissue is movable. Now the photographs we have of the body of Mrs. Menendez. Well, let me put this up. She interrupts him and says, I think 1B is down below. You can see the breast photograph on 1B. Yes. 301. This is called Exhibit 301. Photographs A and B on the left side of 301 are the photographs of the breast area. Is that correct? May I, Your Honor? Sure. A and B, yes. Would it be possible in order to complete my answer to have a photograph of the x-ray of her chest? Ms. Abramson says yes. The witness says, and I'll continue my answer. The problem with trying to, this is a professional witness, man. He's just like, can I have this? While I continue my answer, you can find it. It's like, I don't want to waste the jury's time. You find it, and I'll just keep talking. He says, the problem with trying to establish directionality here is that when a woman is standing up, the breast assumes a different position than when she's lying down, and they also assume almost a little different position if she's standing up with a bra on as opposed to a bra off, and therefore these entrance wounds would be more because of the when a woman is lying down, the breasts tend to flow to the side. If you can see towards the armpit, and therefore these holes are in this breast would be further to the side, to her left side, than they ordinarily would be when she's standing with a bra on. They would be at least an inch closer to the midline. That's one difficulty in evaluating because you have a movable portion of the trajectory, which is probably the first 2 to 3 inches. Then you have a relatively fixed portion of the trajectory, which is about half an inch to 3/4 of an inch. That's the chest wall, so that's relatively fixed. Then if you could put the others up, okay. If it won't be too confusing, if I could go back now and look at how the idea that this was a left to right trajectory would have been arrived at in the first place. Ms. Abramson says, let me just stop you for 1 second if I could. Dr. Golden described these, did he not, as front to back and left to right? Yes, correct. He put front to back first? Yes. Now, Dr. McCarthy calls them left to right. Yes. I'm asking you, just based on the medical evidence, if you see a suggestion of why Dr. Golden ever gave them a left to right trajectory at all. Well, that's what I'm trying to explain, why he might have, because it's difficult. If you say, okay, here are the entrance wounds and where do these fall on the x-ray? Well, the biggest group of them is right here. There are a few out here along the side, but basically here's 5 and one small one right here together. So you say, okay, this mass mostly would have ended up here. So this is only about, an inch and a half from the backbone, and this is starting out here. So it appears to be going from left to right. Okay, now 2 things. As I mentioned before, we'd have to move the breast over because that's where it would be when she was standing in a bra. And secondly, and this is not nearly as obvious, these pellets went completely through the breast tissue, completely through the chest wall, and according to Dr. Golden's account, 8 of them penetrated into the lung tissue, 8 of them penetrated into the lung tissue. Now, whether or not any went the whole way through the breast tissue, it's unclear, but anyhow, here we have this group of 5, which I'd like to concentrate on. And what I'd like to show is how when these entered the body, they were over here, not here. And the reason is what happened when they went into the lung tissue is they interrupted enough blood tissues so there was significant bleeding to the chest and also air leaking into the chest and what is called a hemopneumothorax happened. Hemopneumothorax or something along those lines. There was about a quart of blood in the chest as well as air. What happened in that situation is the lung ordinarily fills the entire chest. So when the lung is filling the entire chest, these pellets go into it and they go into the lateral. I think the trajectory was straight back. They went into the lateral part of the lung, the part of out near the chest wall where some of them don't know if they are or not. I don't have a lateral view. However, what happens when this lung bleeds and air gets in there, There's space between the lung and the chest wall, and that lung collapses. There used to be an operation they used to do for people with TB, collapsed lung. They just put air in there artificially and the whole lung would collapse to do a lung nub, a little nub in the tissue about the size of your cupped hand. That's what they have here. The whole lung that is now down here, very close to the spine, right here. And you can see that very clearly by someone who has read a lot of x-rays. If you look at that space there where you're looking between the ribs there, you can see that there's no lung markings, and lung markings are something you have to know how to look for. There's no lung there. The lung is all down here. That's what you expect with a pneumothorax. The lung is collapsed. For that reason, I feel when these entered, they were out here and then they moved because the whole lung moved with them. That's why this is such a difficult wound to judge the trajectory in because there's only one fixed point. That's the chest wall. And both the breast side of it and the lung side of it were moving. So there's nothing that would have stopped it, basically. And he's already explained that the breast tissue and lung tissue, because they expand and move, they are, well, breast tissue is fibrous, so it's hard to get through, but it will move. Whereas, a bullet or a pellet will penetrate it versus something that, like a bone, which would stop it, like you already explained. She says, if I understand you, what you're saying is that a cluster of pellets in the middle that you said are the ones to go by, they are in the lung, and when the lung collapsed and moved more to the center line, they moved with it. And that's exactly what I'm saying. But if the lung were still expanded in its normal place, those pellets would then be shifted further left. They'd be out near the rib cage. Yes, that's correct. And farther left. Are you saying they would line up perfectly with the breast as it would be held inside the bra? That's correct, yes. And that is why, in comparing the external wounds and x ray wounds and your knowledge of what happens to lungs when they're bleeding, you can say that it is front to back with no deviation of left to right or right to left. Well, minimal deviation. Can't say no deviation, a few degrees one way or another. I can't really tell. The basic direction is back to right. And of course, you must remember that. She says back to right. No, straight back, he says. So front to back, he says. That was confusing. So front to back, the basic description is front to back, and you must remember that when Dr. Golden put down the two directions, he put that one first. Do you remember during the meeting that you had with Dr. Golden pointing out to him that he hadn't taken into consideration placing the breast back on the chest wall as if it had been held in a bra? I did mention that to him. And did he indicate that as a pathologist, it's only his objection calls for hearsay, sustained as to what Dr. Golden said? All right, I want to hear what he said. As a pathologist, it's only his what? If one was not considering the fact that this breast had been contained in a bra at the time of the shooting, would this mislead one believing that this was left to right? Well, if you took that one factor, if you and then combined that with the location of the massive shot there where they are now certainly. Now you are aware, are you not, that Dr. McCarthy's drawing there indicates strictly left to right in the direction of the wound. Well, that's got to be wrong for various reasons. If it was left to right, the pellets would have entered one side of the breast and came out the other side. Good point. As it is, they're not really on the side of the breast at all. They're just on the left half of the front of it and going front to back. If entering that same side of the breast, going side to side, they would have gone in the left side of the breast and come out the right side of the breast. Of course, there's no exit wound at all. Not in the breast area, no. Now, Dr. Fackler, if there were hypothetically the termination point of a round of shotgun ammunition, that would mean that whatever happened with respect to this wound would be the end of the line of that shot, correct? I guess so. If you could rephrase that, I'm not sure I understand your question. According to Dr. Roger McCarthy's construct, the shot into her left breast is the end of this stringing together of wound sites on the two decedents, correct? That's correct, yes. And you're aware, are you not, that some time and energy has been spent in trying to count up pellets left in those various wound sites that he strings together? Yes, I'm aware of that. In your opinion, as a forensic analyst of wounds, ballistically caused wounds, is it appropriate with respect to this last wound to count not just what one can visualize in the x rays, but to count the entry holes? That would be the obvious thing to do, of course. There are 16 distinct holes, meaning a minimum of 16 hit the breast. The reason I say a minimum is because two of the holes look somewhat large and they could be a double projectile, two projectiles traveling very close together, or one behind another, so there's a minimum of 16. And Dr. Golden verified 16 on his report. 16 entry wounds on the left breast. Yes. Now, with respect to the x rays, there's not really a full view made in the x ray of the entire area of her body where pellets entering her breast could have wound up, is there? Well, not a full view, but we have the two views there that we have, and in counting up the number of pellets in these two, they don't come out to a 16. I'm not sure exactly why that would be. There are several possibilities, however. I would suggest that two. May I, Your Honor? Court says, certainly. He continues, I would suggest the possibility that let me, if I may continue, if I may change these around to make it a little bit clearer. Mr. Abramson says, certainly. The witness says, because that's the way they occur. The court says, by the way, you're referring to certain exhibits that haven't been identified by numbers. Ms. Abramson says, yes, Your Honor, before you put that up, we're referring right now on the left is Exhibit 179 and on the right is Exhibit 169. The court says, okay, and these are X-ray views of the chest of Mrs. Menendez. The witness says, the reason I transpose these are because they correspond accurately anatomically the way they are now. This is her right side and this is her left side and the spine is in the middle. Now, in order to line them up, I'd have to put this over this and line, but I'll just keep them like this so we can have both breasts, recognizing that this group up here, this group here, if we transpose them, so if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way through 13. Okay, there's 13. Well, we should have 16. I maintain these could easily be 14 and 15. Now, one would say, how could that possibly happen? Because they're way over in the right, and that doesn't seem to make any sense. However, I suggest to you, if you look right here, what this curved structure here in the diagram, and the diagram separates the abdominal cavity from the chest cavity. Now, this is the location of her diaphragm when she is deceased. When you breathe, your diaphragm moves up and down. When you inhale, take a deep breath and inhale, it pushes it down. And when you exhale, it pushes it up. So this diaphragm could go from maybe at least certainly move at least an inch up and down. So that's somewhat variable. I maintain what easily could have happened is these two pellets could have penetrated the diaphragm because it's a curved dome structure. It could have hit the dome of the diaphragm, perforated into the diaphragm cavity, and fallen over to here, freeing the abdominal cavity because in the abdominal cavity, you have intestines and there's lots of space. And if you put two pellets of lead, which is a heavy substance in the abdominal cavity, when they would go where gravity would, then they would just go where gravity would take them. And I believe Mrs. Menendez was found lying on her right side, as I recall. That's correct, says Miss Abramson. The witness says, and if she were lying on her right side, gravity would take these towards the right. where they would have entered over here, and that would take them maybe 6 inches to the right. I maintain that's a reasonable expectation for where two of them might have gone. I think another thing we cannot overlook is the possibility that maybe we have one or two exits out the back that were missed. And I don't say this in any criticism of Dr. Golden. He's so nice too. Like he's such a professional witness and he's very nice and he was even nice to Dr. McCarthy. Except for that one zing, but he's still pretty nice and professional. And I don't say this with any criticism to Dr. Golden, but it's a well-known fact that what we've seen here, most of these wounds have been through extremities where the path of penetration is not very great. When the projectile comes out, it's not traveling as much at much less velocity than it had when it went in. So it crushes tissue on the way out. It's well known from our studies and the work of others that handgun bullets, for instance, and shotgun pellets are about the same velocity as a lot of handgun bullets. When they enter the front of the torso, make a hole, and when they come out the back, they make a slit. So the hole gets smaller as the bullet goes through the tissue. And when they come out the back, they make a slit because as the projectile loses its velocity near the end of its path, it will push tissue aside, much like if you take a piece of inner tube and try pushing an ice pick through it. When it goes through the hole, it's smaller because it's already stretched. It's well known that exit wounds are little slits very often. They can be half moon shaped. They can be sometimes T shaped, but very commonly they're just a tiny slit. You could have one or two very tiny slits on the back, almost not noticeable because there's no tissue actually crushed. It's just turned aside, popped through, and went back together. As a matter of fact, Dr. Bodden has a book. I've forgotten the name of it. He does have a small pocketbook that I've read a year ago, and he makes that distinction. So it could easily have been overlooked. And he's saying that these can be often overlooked because of the fact that um, they can be so small and they don't look like an entry wound or an exit wound for some kind of larger velocity bullet. All right, so Ms. Abramson says that a low velocity exits wounds on the torso are slits and entrance wounds are round? Yes, I'm just saying that's a possibility. In any event, whether all the pellets can be found on an X-ray or whether some of them exited or some of them are just not observable because there's only two views from this X-ray rather than three, do you have any reservation in counting the 16 entry wounds as the number of pellets that struck her breast? I don't see how I can. We have 16 holes. I can count them. Anyone can see them, and Dr. Golden also verifies this. There's one little point I make. There's one little point I might make. It's not an important point, but if you will. Well, let me just ask you a question first, or else this just reads as a gigantic narrative. There are two what appear to be defects in the crease. I was going to, I know, that's what I'm asking. In the crease of the left breast, that would appear to be farther apart from the other pellet defects on the breast than they are from each other. Yes, that's correct. In other words, these up here appear to be closer together, and these two under here would seem to be farther apart. That's correct. Is it your opinion that all of these, though, including the two in the crease, are part of the identical pattern? Yes, and that's what I wanted to show. Now you can come down and show. Thank you. Again, here I believe we have the effect of cavity. With the breast, with Mrs. Menendez standing, this breast would be hanging downward, and I don't know if I can visualize this, if you can visualize this, or I might have to draw it as the breast. Well, why don't you draw it? I'll get you the post-it note. If I could, it would be easier to understand. Miss Abramson says I have two sets of post-it notes. An unidentified juror says it's in front. Ms. Abramson says, thank you very much. Let me take off this one. What I would suggest is we just use the easel. The court says, why don't you just use the post-it on top of the one piece of paper? Miss Abramson says, we can do this. I'll tell you what, Dr. Fackler, so the jury can see better. These are sticky. Here's the surface to draw on, right here. The witness says, I have a surface, but I don't have anything to draw with. I'm looking for a little thing we had. I had a red one I can use. Ms. Abramson says, is that small enough? It's fine. Okay. Referring to 301B, I think what we have here is the, if you will, being a cross section through the body of Mrs. Menendez's breast. You have basically the kind of thing this kind of thing, and you have the holes up here and these holes in the crease and the nipple in the area here. With her standing while let me draw in the upward position. I think this is more likely anatomy of the breast, and you can see these wounds would now be here, which would be the same distance from these. But with a projectile coming in the direction, one that hit here and one that hit here in the crease would be from this view very close together because all this would be parallel to the path. I'm lost without visuals here, but whatever. This empty space is here. This empty space in here is essentially viewed a projectile coming in like this. This is more now, it's more parallel to the path, and here it's spread out. And so what I think is we have these projectiles hitting here, which are the ones visible here, and two that hit in the crease are down here. Now, the reason there's another subtle hint theory that these hit in the crease, because as you can see, each of them here appears to have a little shadow, just a little shadowing or little other, maybe a little abrasion. And I think what happened here, instead of it, if I enlarged this area right here and have that come, there may be a little bit of this kind of thing, maybe not straight down here, but possibly a little roll of fatty subcutaneous tissue here that would make an actual crease. When you stretch the crease out, you would have this hole, but the appearance of a little thing on the other side, you can see the little creases and you can see each one of these holes has that little shadowing, which would indicate that was hit in the crease, and therefore would put these realistically as part of the same rather dense pattern. If you count those two with that rather dense pattern, you have 16 entry wounds, correct? That's correct. That is correct. And do you understand, Dr. Fackler, that depending on who's doing the counting, whether it's Dr. Lawrence or Dr. McCarthy, if you make the count 16 for the breast wound, we're way over 30 pellets for what's supposed to be one gunshot round. Yes. And do you understand, do you not, that number 4 buck doesn't come in 30 pellets? Objection leading, rephrase the question. Based on your experience over the years with firearms and your experience in designating shotgun wound projectiles, how many pellets come loaded in a round of number 4 buckshot, such as what was used here? In my experience, it has always uniformly been 26, and it's marked on the box. I'm sorry, 27, and it's marked on the box as 27. Seen, I've never seen 26 or 28. This dude's a firearm expert since he was, what, 12? Or at least he started his firearms expertise at that age. And he's never seen them come. Dr. McCarthy has testified that he opened some of the rounds, some of them came in 26, some of them came in 27. He only opened a few though. He didn't even open that many. He says that yeah, he just opened like 5 or 6, and some of them were 27, some of them had 26, some of them had 28. This dude who's been doing this his whole life says, "Nuh-uh, that's never happened to me." but all right. All right. Another point that I wanted to make was the point that they just made prior to this about the number of pellets was the count of pellets. So, in case you're confused about that, this was a whole big thing with Dr. Roger McCarthy on the stand and how they've combined all these, shots together where it goes through Jose's arm and hits Kitty in the breast. I was going to call her Mary Louise. That is her name, but she often went by Kitty. But anyways, so they the number of pellets that are counted or that they account for in this combined shot between the two of them is 30, whereas the number of pellets inside a bullet or a shotgun shell is 27 exactly. Uniformly always been 27 in his experience. So that all comes together, basically discrediting Dr. McCarthy on his whole, you know, uh, 30 pellets for a combined shot. It just doesn't line up. It doesn't make sense. And you cut them open yourself and seen them being cut open. Not many of them. And you've never come across one that was off count. I've never really looked for it, but I did call Winchester and ask them about this, and they said they're marked 27 and that's the way they come. Is that what Winchester Company? Or that was the Winchester Company? He says, yes, that was the Winchester Company. You understand that's the Fiat Company? Yes, I didn't call the Fiat Company. You talk to firearms examiners with some frequency, don't you? Yes, I did talk about this to several firearms examiners. About this notion that somehow the number of pellets vary from shell casing to shell casing. Did you talk to them about that? Yeah, specifically about that because this bothered me. If you look at how much a number four buckshot weighs, it's about 20 grams. If you say there's some 26 and some 28, that's 40 grains difference between one shell and the other. And to me, when you talk, Mr. Khan says, I would object. No question pending. The court says, your next question, please. Miss Abramson says, what was it about this that struck you and made you inquire of others? I guess Mr. Khan doesn't like that this guy talks a lot. Well, it's fair game because McCarthy did the same thing. And he did give us a lot of word salad. Miss Abramson says, what was it about this that struck you that made you inquire of others? Well, I thought the variation would be way beyond what a normal ammunition company would accept. And did you then talk to others who were regular firearms examiners to see if they ever have seen this phenomenon of number four buckshot having variable pellets? I did. And what was the response? Objection calls for hearsay. Sustained. Ms. Abramson says, was one of the people you talked to about this Dwight Van Horn? Yes. And do you right now have any reason to believe, Dr. Fackler, that your own experience was erroneous? Do you have any reason to believe that number four buckshot is other than 24 pellets per round? No, I have no reason to believe that's not true. Now, with respect to the number four, or the number six, sorry, wound number six in Mrs. Menendez, left breast wound in the photograph, that is, I believe, A, on can't remember how with 301. Her left forearm is drawn up at the coroner's office so that it lies just beneath the breast. And that's a suggestion to you, is it not, that the coroner considered these two wounds to be affiliated? Objection calls for speculation. As phrased, it does. All right. Even in his supplemental report, does Dr. Golden affiliate the left forearm wound with the left breast wound? I'm not sure I recall. In the 92 supplement, In the 92 supplement, I don't remember. I can check if you wish. Well, let me ask you this. Based on how it appears, does it seem to you that those two wounds probably were affiliated? Objection calls for speculation. Overruled. Okay, can I answer? Yes. Well, certainly, it takes little stretch of the imagination to see they met, or they meet. It takes little stretch? I mean, they're right there. A simple bend of the arm puts it exactly the right position, and the spread appears to be appropriate, and so there are a lot of things that are going for it. I don't think, based on what we can say, certainly not absolutely, but certainly a good possibility. And did you try to determine how many entry wounds are in that arm? I counted four. And since this is supposed terminus point of round of ammunition, would you consider those four in conjunction with the 16 to indicate that she was hit with 20 pellets at this point, at this place in her body? Well, I know she was hit with 16, and whether or not those other four were associated, if they were, then that would come up to 20. We were still missing seven. Okay. And with respect to the missing seven, are you aware of the fact that there are or appear to be pellet defects on the exterior of the right forearm of Mrs. Menendez? Exterior. The dorsal aspect. The dorsal aspect of the right. Yeah, yes, correct. And hypothetically, if Mr. Menendez had his arm out in the vicinity in the manner I'm showing, with the dorsal aspect prominent in the vicinity of Mrs. Menendez's left breast and left arm, could some of the pellets in that round have struck him in the dorsal aspect of the forearm? This is, I think, another possibility that must be strongly considered. Based on the number of pellets in Mrs. Menendez's breast, is it your opinion, Dr. Fackler, that that breast wound is not the termination point of a shot trajectory that would first go through Mr. Menendez's left elbow, then into his right arm, and then out and into her breast? No, I certainly don't think, based on my studies, I certainly don't think the penetration potential of number four buckshot would allow that to be possible. I believe that what we see in her breast, penetrating through the breast tissue, the chest wall into the lungs, and how far into the lungs, I don't know. I don't think anybody does because we don't have a lateral view. But I would think that would be consistent with the limitation penetration of the number four buckshot, and I can't see how number four buck could go through two arms and still go the whole way through her breast. Plus the fact would it be fair to say that in addition to that the pellet count is off? Well, yes, but I was just looking at penetration wise, I don't think it's possible. So it's your opinion she could not have sustained a penetrating wound of that left breast if the shot that endured her breast had first passed through his right arm. Is that fair enough? Yes, that is my opinion. Yes. So there you have it. He, wound ballistics expert OG, says he doesn't believe that it went through Jose's arm and then struck her in the breast. He thinks that Mr. or Dr. Golden and Dr. McCarthy both are incorrect in their theory about this. Sorry, my lips are getting dry. All right, so moving on. Now, if we could then go to the right arm. You understand that part of the construct of Mr. McCarthy for the supposed shot I envisioned a shot column passing through the medial aspect of Mr. Menendez's right arm and exiting the lateral aspect and then entering Mrs. Menendez's breast from the lateral exit site. Yes, you understand that's what McCarthy is talking about. Yes. Let's start, first of all, with the wounds that are shown on 295 photographs A and B, which are the left side, the first two photographs. Okay? Yes. And you can see in photograph A, first of all, with respect to the arm, a large, we call these things defects, but I guess hole is as good a word as any. A large hole in the interior or medial aspect of the arm, correct? Yes. Below that hole, there are some individual that what have been described as individual satellite defects. Those are little holes, correct? Yes. And on his right anterior chest wall, right front chest, there are some red marks. Yes. First of all, let's start with those red marks. What are they? I think they're bruises. And in medical jargon, are bruises also called contusions? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, they are. It's okay. Bruises is easier. And is there another kind of damage that is called scrapes in layman's language and abrasions in medical language? Yes. And what is the difference, Dr. Fackler, between a scrape or abrasion and a bruise or contusion? The difference is that a scrape or abrasion removes the outer surface of the skin, and there is then usually a weeping of serum from the underlying tissue or sometimes actual bleeding from the subcutaneous tissue, generally ending up in this. Exposure to the air hardens, and you end up with a scab. And anybody that's fallen and had their knee brushed on a street or something like that knows what it's commonly called a brush burn, which is just a scraping off of the surface. And we have this weeping and the scab formation that's an abrasion. A contusion is a wound where there is no disruption of the surface layers of the skip, but what you have is breaking of by a blunt force like a fist, a breaking of small blood vessels and capillaries just beneath the skin, and they bleed small amounts just beneath the skin and give you first a red type of discoloration, which later turns to a blush type of discoloration, like a shiner, like a black eye. That's the best example, certainly. In your opinion, based on examining these photographs, and you also had the discussion with Dr. Golden, did you not, about this area? Yes. Based on that, you formed the opinion that those marks are bruises, basically contusions. Yes, I do. Is there any evidence in examining the surface of those marks that any part of the skin was scraped away? I couldn't see any. It's sometimes a little bit difficult to tell on the photograph, but I can't tell for sure. But I didn't. To me, these look like bruises, and well, I guess we'll get into that. So you have an opinion based on your training and experience as to precisely what caused these marks, do you not? Yes, I do. And the mechanism that you believe caused these marks is something like what you just described, a blunt force that could create bleeding under the skin. Objection, leading, sustained. Would you describe the type of mechanism that you believe caused these bruises? What caused these bruises, in my opinion, is something just striking a blunt force from the outside, describing the chest wall. And do you have an opinion as to what this thing was, this blunt force that struck the chest wall and created these bruises? Yes, I do. And would you describe for the jury what that is and how that mechanism worked? Yes, I believe what happened here is a shot column. May I, Your Honor, go down? Before you get there, let me ask you one crucial question, okay? Do you believe that, well, strike that, with respect to what Dr. Golden calls wound number 3, the injuries to the right arm, yes, which Dr. Fackler is the entry and which is the exit? The entry is on the lateral aspect and the exit is on the medial aspect towards the front. So the entry is on the back, the entry is in the back, and the exit in the front, essentially. Do you recall that's the opposite of what Dr. Roger McCarthy claims? Yes, I realize that. You realize that's exactly what Dr. Golden claims? Yes. Mr. Khan says objection as to time. The court says sustained as to the last question and answer. The answer is stricken. Ms. Abramson says, well, you understand. I would object to that. Objection. Dr. Golden has never stated otherwise. The court says, don't argue, just ask another question. Huh? I hate judges like that. It's like, no, you just inappropriately ruled on something, and now you're just going to tell her, shut up. Okay. She goes, with respect to what's in Dr. Golden's report of September, he indicates the entry to the back and the exits in the medial aspect. That's correct. With respect to the photographs of him at the autopsy probing the back, he's indicating that that's an entry wound, correct? I'm not sure. Objection calls for speculation. Sustained. The answer is stricken. Ms. Abramson says, in reference to your discussions with Dr. Golden, he's indicating that that wound is on the lateral. Objection calls for hearsay. Sustained. How is this expert supposed to appropriately, sufficiently testify if he can't testify to the other experts in this case and what they are saying or doing? It's ridiculous, but here we are. Your Honor, I believe the prosecution was allowed to get into Dr. McCarthy's chats with Dr. Golden. Court says, well, at least this point the objection is sustained. Is there any indication in Dr. Golden's even original autopsy report to the effect that he believed that this defect on the medial aspect was anything but an exit wound? I don't think so. In fact, didn't he connect the exit wound with the bruises on the chest? Yes. And based on his reasoning, wasn't it necessary that this large defect be an exit wound to explain the bruising on the chest? Yes. And he he has always had the direction of this wound being from right to left. Objection calls for speculation. The witness didn't even read his testimony. Sustained. We're talking about his original report. The court says, you didn't ask that question, did you? Ms. Abramson says, yes. The court says, you asked the question, always said that and always. Ms. Abramson says, I'm sorry, based on the original report, Your Honor, I stand corrected. You're asking in that original report. Ms. Abramson says, in the original report, as well as the amended report, hasn't Dr. Golden always maintained that this wound here on the medial aspect was an entry wound that was communicated with the bruising on the chest? Yes. And hasn't he always described that wound as a wound from right to left? Objection to in those sources. Always. Ms. Abramson says, well, the court says, all right, you haven't finished the question. Why don't you ask it again? He first wrote on this issue in 1989 in the autopsy report, correct? Yes. He wrote again about it in his amended report in 95. Yes. And you have read both of those reports. Yes, I have. And both of those reports are consistent, and are they not, with his ascribing a direction to that wound in the medial aspect of the arm and the chest as being right to left? Yes. So he's never changed his opinion. So why did the court? Okay. All right. And that is your opinion as well, is it not, that the entry is lateral, the entry is medial, and the direction is right to left? Yes. And that's the opposite direction than McCarthy's construct, correct? Yes. Now, would you describe with that as a given the direction of number 3 in the right arm? What made the bruises on the chest wall? Now, if I may, the court says, yes, go ahead. Do you want to draw something again, Dr. Fackler? Would it help? The witness says, yeah, yes, I guess that would be a good idea. Ms. Abramson says, okay. The witness says, I think I could maybe try to explain it without drawing it, but I think maybe drawing would be better. Ms. Abramson says, let's put another post-it up there. Put it right next to the wound that you're drawing about. What I'd like you to do, or what I'd like to do before we go any further, is mark the drawing that you made previously of a cross section of the breast. Is 314 next? Court says 315. Ms. Abramson says, I'll mark the drawing of the cross section of the breast as 315. Then we'll mark what you're about to do as 316. And, Your Honor, could we reserve number 317 for the cavitation drawing of the M16 bullet that Dr. Fackler did this morning? The court says that will be marked 317. Ms. Amerson says, "Thank you, Your Honor. All right, now you can do what you want on 316." The witness says, "Okay, if I can draw a cross section through the body of Mr. Menendez's chest wall, which comes out something like this, with his nipple right about here. Now, the bruising extends quite a bit over an area that is somewhat curved. And I think what happened is, I think we have a good indication that this is an exit wound for a few reasons. One being, if we look at we have a point right here. And when we have a point and skin is torn and there's a point, that means the skin was torn apart. A projectile doesn't make that kind of a hole. When a skin is torn by cavitation, it's stretched beyond where it can go. Then it tears, and you can get what we call a satellite tear because we have tears going to somewhat like a star. A satellite tear routinely gives you a point. So we have a point very visible right here. These are basically straight lines here leading into the point, so it's consistent with this tissue being torn apart by cavitation and being stretched by cavitation. So what I think happened here, we also had this arm broken here, of course. What I think happened here is I think Mr. Menendez had his right arm in a similar fashion to the way I'm putting mine, folded across his chest and covering his nipple like so. I'll try to demonstrate, or I'll try to draw that if I can here. It's a little bit difficult concept to, the arm would be something like this. It would be intended or indented somewhat because if you push an arm over a curved substance, it will form because the arm is somewhat, the skin of the arm would match the curved area right here. And we have a bone going down the arm too. Let me mark that more densely here. What I think happened when the arm was in this position, I think a shot from rather close distance, probably no more than 3 feet, entered the back of the arm. And here the pellets are quite fairly close together. So we have a cavitation that I explained earlier how they are all acting, or most of them acting like a single projectile. And so therefore, you have a fairly large cavitation. Now, the arm isn't all that big, so you can stretch that much before it, uh, so you can stretch that much before it's going to break if you try to put this much stretch into the arm. I think what was here at the exit, I have no idea what he's talking about, that arm got broken, but before it got broken, the bone also got broken. And I think here in this situation, it's a little unclear, but there is, put an arrow here. What we're seeing here is a fairly simple break. And when you get a bone, just a simple break, which means it has pushed from one side, the same kind of push you get if you get hit in the leg with an automobile bumper and you get a leg broken and have a simple break. Cavitation is nothing more than a push in one direction. You get a simple break. And when you have a broken bone by actually being hit by a bullet or multiple pellets, you have part of the bone missing because it's thrown out and you have many bone fragments. There are other x-rays in this case of Mrs. Menendez where you can show where bones have been hit by pellets. There are many, many fragments in the x-ray we don't see. There's many fragments. So I think what we have here is we had a shot that went into the arm just about in this position. Now, maybe one or two of the pellets might have hit the bone, and there are some pellet fragments in there, so maybe some of them did, but I think that the predominant mechanism here, because of the torn exit wounds and the single exit wounds here, I think we have a very large cavitation, and what happened when that cavity opened is uh, when the cavity occurred in there, is it not only pushed on the bone, but it pushed the other way too. As it pushed the arm down onto Mr. Menendez's chest, it was just like a blow. And what's more, I think there were two blows. I think this is one blow and this is the second blow. And the reason I say that is because in cavitation, as the temporary cavity goes out, and I have in my possession here some copies of this from high speed photography done of this that shows the repetitive nature of cavitation. In other words, if cavitation goes out, the arm is, or the tissue, the stretchy tissue that collapses and sort of slaps together and then bounces back, and you get a second cavitation, which is smaller than the first, but still considerable. You can actually get three cavities. We can see this on high-speed photography. We can see this big and then it collapses together and then it comes up again. So what I think we have here is I think we have one slam of a cavity there, and then that moved and the arm a little bit and the second one down here. Now the other, I have no idea what I was talking about. Now the other, I think the strongest point for this is something that I couldn't figure out. Dr. Golden figured it out and told it to me. Objection calls for hearsay, motion to strike. The court says, all right, the answer will stand as phrased here or as stated your next question. Ms. Abramson says, why don't you have a seat for a second? Stay there and let me ask you another question. Is it appropriate, Dr. Fackler, for a forensic expert such as yourself to consult with other forensic experts to get the benefit of their wisdom and experience? I think in many cases it's almost mandatory. And did you therefore consult with Dr. Golden concerning a certain aspect of what that of the wound's configuration? Yes, I did. And did you also discuss that aspect of the wound configuration with Dr. Wecht? Yes, I did. Now, does that appear to be within the outer borders of that contusion, with some white lines? Well, there are white lines. They're not limited to the outer border. I'm saying within those borders. I see. Yes, you're absolutely correct. Yes. Inside this red area, this stripes basically some white lines? There are some white lines. And in your opinion, what caused strike that? And those white lines are areas in the skin where there does appear to be bleeding under the skin or contusion. That's correct. So those are areas that appear that something prevented this banging of the arm tissue from causing a bruise. That's correct. And in your opinion, what was it that projected those areas or protected those areas that don't have the bruising? Well, they were protected by the folds in Mr. Menendez's shirt because this gave padding of the folded area. So basically all that like word mumbo jumbo was his arm was like on his chest or whatever, and the pressure, the blow from his arm moving and hitting his chest would have made a bruise on his chest, but then there was pieces of fabric that were wadded up that seemed to have protected his arm there. Um, because this gave padding to the folded area as being three layers of shirt material together instead of one, which would give it a relative amount of protection. And if wearing the shirt, if he puts his arm over like this, it's very likely there would be folds. I'll point to these areas. All right, so that was a long explanation, but I think we got the answer from him. So you can even circle them if you want. That's our exhibit. You can do whatever you'd like to it. He says, circle it? Sure. I don't want to. I'd rather not circle. I'll just put arrows to them. Sure, do arrows. That's one of them. That's another. And that's another one. That's one. These are all streaks. And what I think that is, if I could draw that here, if you have one, the shirt non-folded, you have this. And with the arm, of course, we would actually have two because we'd have the shirt on and the arms and the shirt on the chest. So we would have two layers. And then if you fold one of these, what you get is, so maybe the shirt on the arm, like the sleeve. So the sleeve that's on the arm and the shirt. So you have like a double padded layer. So then if you fold one of those, what you get is this kind of thing. You would have, instead of two, you would have four. You might even get folding of both of them, which would give you even more padding. It looks to me, as I say, that's what would protect those because there's these three layers of this soft shirt material rather than one. Are you keeping in mind, are you not, Dr. Fackler, that Mr. Menendez was wearing a short sleeve shirt? Yes, I am. I am. Whether or not the short sleeved, I think probably this short. I don't know if the short sleeves went that far or not. If it didn't go that far, then we have, three or one. And if it did go that far, we have two, or wait a minute, one, two, three, four, four or two. So there's two extra layers of cloth. Thank you. A wrinkle or fold gives us two extra layers of cloth or padding. That's the principle here. Whether or not these two extras are added to two layers of cloth or one layer of cloth, I don't think makes much difference. You can resume the witness stand. Are you familiar, Dr. Fackler, with Dr. Lawrence's explanation for how that bruisings occurred? Yes. Did you read that in his testimony? Yes, I did. And does his explanation that this is caused by pellets grabbing a hold of the shirt and pulling it across his chest and causing basically friction burns? Is that opinion correct? No, I don't see how it can be. Why don't you see how that can't be correct? Well, for several reasons. May I draw another one? Are you going to draw again on the same chart? Yes, it's the same answer. Would you draw a line across because you're now going to illustrate something different? Yes, you can do it that way. You can see the width of this area here where the shirt would have had to have been grabbed and pulled. I'm estimating 6 inches wide relative to the direction of path of projectile that was proposed by Dr. Lawrence when he explained this. It's about 6 inches wide. Now, a pattern of projectiles coming across there will give you, well, I think we have to go no further than, say, the breast area of Mrs. Menendez to prove that point. We see a random number of projectiles, and as this is coming across the chest, there would be no way that more than one or two of those at the most could touch this. It would have to be sort of right there where it would touch maybe one or two, and so just one or two of those would have to pull that across 6 inches of chest. Now you're saying only one or two? Because they're coming across. You see, they're coming across. What I'm trying to do is cut across and show it cutting in this plane, front to back plane, the pattern of the shot of the shot column that's coming across that. Let me see if I can help because I know if it makes me dizzy, I can imagine. Mr. Khan says, objection, motion to strike, argumentative. The court says, all right, the comment of counsel is stricken. Your next question, please. Ms. Abramson says, you're talking about a column of shot coming across parallel to his chest, correct? Well, that's what's been postulated, yes. So this green rod, that's correct. It's supposed to be an entire column of pellets coming across, correct? Yes. They don't cross single file, do they, Dr. Fackler? I almost said something else. Um, they come in, they can be spread out maybe 4 or 6 inches, but they don't line up, basically in a group. They don't line up like a bead of strings. No, they're basically in a mass together. Only some of them would be some have to be closest and some have to be farther away. Yes. If they're in some kind of spread pattern across a chest, objection, leading, overruled. Is that correct? Yes, in order to have one of them, if any of them had hit the chest, it would be a groove in the chest. Or if if several of them had hit the chest, there would be several grooves in the chest with a hole, an in and out hole there. Because the further you get on into this, the more of this has to have holes. If you're speaking of them just hitting the shirt and not hitting the chest, they must be very few of them that would do that. And it just mechanically doesn't make any sense to me that even though the spread of the pattern is even, it makes no sense any way you look at it. And furthermore, I've tried to research this briefly in the standard texts on wound ballistics and forensics, and I've never seen any place that it's been suggested that can happen. That a couple of pellets can grab a shirt and tug along and cause burns on the underlying skin? I've never seen it reported or even alluded to anywhere. So, yet again, another thing debunked of the prosecution witnesses by this expert. He's excellent already. We're only on like the first day he's been on the stand. He's already debunked quite a bit from the last two witnesses, which were the star key witnesses for the prosecution. So is it your conception, Dr. Fackler, that if pellets had grabbed hold of a shirt that way, they'd tear a pellet-sized hole in them? Well, in this position, it would be pellet sized, but if you look, it's absolutely parallel. It would probably be a slice, maybe as much as 6 inches long, because as these pellets are coming very parallel to the surface, they would slice it. It's like if you take a flashlight and shine it on a wall, you get a round beam, and as you walk, if you walk down to the very side of the wall, you can shine a flashlight along and go the whole length of the room, and that's the way that you look at pellets. It's like a beam. It would cut the shirt. It's like a beam at this parallel to the shirt. It would have had to cut the shirt. In addition to that, Dr. Fackler, if there are pellets that are tugging that hard at one side of the shirt, would you expect that they would be pulling across both sides of the chest? In other words, let me show you. I'm not sure that I understand that. Let me give you an example. Can I pull on your shirt? I suppose. Okay, if you were to envision some pellets that grabbed hold of your shirt and pulled, can you feel the pull on the left side? Yes, but I think his shirt was more stretchy than mine. But the theory here was that it pulled so hard across the right side that it caused these bruises. It's the shirt pulling that's supposed to cause the bruises. You understand that? That's what I said. So if you pull on the shirt, it's pulling on your left side now, right? In my in my shirt it is. And there's no bruises on Mr. Menendez's left chest wall, are there? I didn't see any, no. Now, based on his original report, that shirt pulling and causing these rope burns, if you will, to the right side of the chest, that wasn't McCarthy's theory, was it? No, I don't recall it was. So it wasn't McCarthy's theory that these were actually marks from pellets. Yes, yeah, neither of them are possible, but that was Dr. McCarthy's theory, yes. And what was wrong with Dr. McCarthy's theory that these were not sort of shirt burns, but actual pellet marks? What's wrong with that? Well, pellets are small, and if one or two of them actually went across the chest, they would make parallel lines across the chest. Make a groove? Make like a groove or cut. It wouldn't make a flat thing like this. This is impossible. So it would actually make some kind of hole or trough. Yes. Like a graze wound. Like a graze wound or groove, certainly. There are, in fact, grazed wounds or grooves on the decedents in this case. Elsewhere, yes. But there's none here. None here. Objection leading. Let's try to refrain from leading. Ms. Abrams says, I'm sorry, Your Honor. Does a graze wound or groove tear the skin? Well, it disrupts the skin. It depends how deeply it is. You get into an area here where you're talking about how much of the skin, any graze wounds that you'd identify as a graze wound would, by definition, disrupt the outer layer of the epidermis of the skin. A deeper graze could disrupt the dermis of the skin, and you could see the fat underlying it. And I think you could still call that a graze wound. A graze wound would be a wound that would be the surface wound, be entirely open, and then when you got deep enough, so there was an entrance and exit, it's no longer a graze wound. And of course, in your opinion, these are nothing more than bruises. That's correct. And does the position of those bruises and your opinion of how they were caused further confirm the notion that the wound to the right arm came from back to front? Yes. And if the wound to the right arm came from back to front, then Mr. McCarthy's construction that it is somehow connected to the wound to Mr. Menendez's left elbow is wrong. Correct? That's correct. So, yet again, disproving and just debunking more and more of the prosecution's case, and I'm loving it. Not that, like, we already know that they did it, it's just how they did it. And the fact that this is lining up more so with the defense's theory and narrative of what happened and the brothers, narrative of what happened rather than the prosecution, it just makes you be more inclined to believe all the other things that they've said about the abuse and everything. Obviously, we know they lied at first to try to get out of their punishment, but a lot of people lie to get out of punishment. A lot of criminals lie to get out of punishment, so they wouldn't be the first. But, and they were kids and they were scared, I'm sure. They were scared prior to the shootings, and they were even more scared after, not knowing what the heck was going to happen. So I'm sure they had reason to lie about that. But anyways, but this gives more credibility to their narrative about how it happened and why it may have happened. Um, where do we leave off? And do you believe it is wrong? Hold on. Where did we leave off? Oh, that his McCarthy's depiction of the elbow, the arm through to the breast shot is incorrect. And you do believe it is wrong, don't you? Yes, I do. Objection leading overruled. Yes, I do. Ms. Amerson says, Your Honor, this would be as good a time as any. The court says, okay, we'll take a recess until 3:30. Don't discuss this matter. Don't form any final opinions. We'll resume at 3:30. And that is where we will stop for today. We'll get back into it tomorrow. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. What do you think of these dailies that are like a lot shorter, where it's only like an hour and a half that I'm going, and then I can, we can have more videos throughout the day, or did you like the longer videos? I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. I kind of like going daily, even though sometimes I apologize because of my medical stuff I do miss. And last week I had my boyfriend had medical stuff. We were in the hospital. And yeah, so I just apologize. And sometimes I'm not going to be consistent on every day, but my goal is to try to get a video Monday through Friday for you at noon Central Time. That's my goal. Sometimes I might be late on that day. Sometimes I might not get to it that day at all because sometimes it is what it is. I try to give you guys to get ahead of my recordings, but it doesn't always happen that way. And sometimes things go wrong, and sometimes I just can't record that day. So I try to schedule ahead. But like I said, a lot of times I am recording day of, and sometimes I just don't have the energy or time or whatever. Something might go wrong. So I apologize. I do try to get these to you Monday through Friday. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you very, very much. And take care. Um, Thank you guys again. I really appreciate you. Bye now. Oopsies. I always do the wrong thing. Here you go.